Benvinguts i benvingudes a la sessió Decréixer per a viure millor, on ens preguntem sobre quina és la potència del decreixement per fer front als problemes que tenim ara mateix, als grans problemes que tenim ara mateix. I tenim la sort de tenir amb nosaltres el Jason Hickel. Good afternoon, Jason. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Hello, Barcelona.
Parlaré 5 minuts en català per fer una presentació formal i després passarem a l'anglès per fer les preguntes al Jason. L'acte, com sabeu, durarà fins a 7:15. Estarem una horeta amb les respostes del Jason i després 15 minuts per preguntes vostres, d'acord? Bé, segurament tots i totes, o la majoria, el coneixeu, però el doctor Jason Hickel és antropòleg de l'economia, autor i membre de la Royal Society of Arts. És professor a l'ICTA, a l'Institut de Ciència i Tecnologia Ambientals de la Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, i és investigador visitant sènior de l'Institut de Desigualtats Internacionals de la London School of Economics. La investigació de Jason Hickel en els darrers 2 anys, s'ha centrat en temes com l'economia política global, l'economia ecològica i les desigualtats a nivell global, i són els temes que tracten en els seus 2 darrers llibres, el de Divide, A Brief Guide to Global Inequality and Its Solutions, editat per Penguin el 2017, i el llibre Less is More, que va editar Verso Books i que va ser traduït al castellà per l'editorial Capitán Swing, Menos es más, cómo el decrecimiento salvará el mundo. És una veu molt destacada en el diàleg i en el debat sobre el decreixement i les desigualtats globals, i per nosaltres és un enorme plaer tenir-lo aquí. Jason, good afternoon again.
Thank you.
I want to begin with a very, I think, simple question, but I think that's a fundamental one, that it's about degrowth, the concept of degrowth. Because I think it's really important that we can understand your approach and your ecological, economical, and political approach to the growth, but also because I think that we can create up some common misunderstandings about what degrowth really means. Because I think that the mainstream ideas is telling us that we have, on the one hand, we have growth that is related to prosperity, to abundance, to develop social well-being. And on the other hand, we have degrowth, that it tends to be associated with scarcity, crisis, and so on. So the notion of using less, shrinking the economy, and becoming more sustainable may seem to contradict this hegemonic mainstream understanding of a healthy economy. So viewing the growth as a desirable goal might not initially make sense, at least under this hegemonic imaginary of the mainstream economy. So the question is that if you could elaborate what really the growth means.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting this conversation today, and thank you all for coming. I'm very happy to be here doing this event in Puebla now. I live only 1 mile away, so this is my home, and it's wonderful to be here with you. I'm very sorry about the wind. I hope it will not be too much of a problem, but let's see how we go. So in terms of degrowth, look, I think the dominant narrative out there that we all just internalize is that growth equals progress, whether it's social progress or technological progress or improvements in human well-being. We just assume that that's what growth is. But this is an incorrect assumption. Growth is actually very narrowly defined. Growth simply represents an increase in total industrial production, aggregate industrial production, as measured by market prices. This is what GDP is. So for instance, if we increase production of tear gas worth 1 million euros, this is considered exactly the same value as increasing production of public healthcare and public housing or public transit for 1 million euros, right? So clearly, when it comes to the question of social progress and well-being, what actually matters is not aggregate production, but rather the specific forms of production that we're doing, the specific goods and services that we're producing, and whether people have access to them. So are we producing socially beneficial things, or are we producing destructive things, right? And this is important in a capitalist economy. This is the fundamental problem that we face, right? The ecological crisis is ultimately a crisis driven by capitalism. Under capitalism, which is an undemocratic economic system, production is controlled by capital, by the 1% who own the majority of investable assets, by the big financial firms, by the large corporations. And for them, for capital, the purpose of increasing production is not to meet human needs or to achieve social progress or ecological goals, but rather to maximize and accumulate profit, right? So as a result of this, we get massive overproduction of destructive things like fossil fuels and SUVs and private jets and mansions and industrial beef, whatever, because these things are highly profitable to capital. But we get chronic underproduction of things like affordable housing and nutritious regenerative food and public transit and insulated buildings, because these things are necessary but not profitable to capital. So it's fundamentally a question of ownership in the economy, who controls production, and our existing situation is a perverse one, where we have extremely high levels of total output, right? I mean, look at the production that occurs around us, and yet still, many people cannot meet even the most basic human needs, right? There's mass deprivation even in rich countries, and we're failing to meet our ecological goals. These are not difficult problems to solve. The social and ecological crises are not difficult problems to solve. The problem is simply that we do not have democratic control over our productive capacities such that we could solve them very quickly. So that's ultimately, I think, the issue here. Now, one key thing I want to mention is that when it comes to degrowth, a lot of people think this simply means reducing all forms of production. But in reality, it's simply targeting destructive and less necessary forms of production. Forms of production that we know are not needed, that we know are only beneficial to capital or to the elite, right? There's huge chunks of our economy that we know do not benefit us, and these are the parts that we have to scale down, while improving and even increasing production in other sectors. So let's degrow production of SUVs and industrial beef and mansions, and increase production of public transits and regenerative farming and things like that we know to be essential. So it's important to understand this double dynamic, the sectoral specificity of degrowth. Yeah.
And to disaggregate these sectors that are producing things that are not producing ecological and social well-being, maybe, okay, maybe, and you have said something about that, maybe we need another measures, another metrics that can produce other economy and they can replace GDP. So there's a thing in your book, Less is More, that I interest a lot, that you state that while it's true that countries with higher incomes often have better life expectancies, there is no anatomic causal relationship between these two variables. So, and one of your critiques is that these ideas rely on GDP as a measure of success, of economic success, but that GDP measures certain types of economic activities, but does not reflect quality of life or all the social and ecological necessary conditions for the ecosocial reproduction, for the reproduction of ecosystems. So I have two questions here. The first one is about what alternative measures or indicators could replace the GDP in a post-growth economy or for promoting a post-growth economy. And the second one, I think it's maybe most important, is this really a solution? So to what extent is the adoption or the implementation of these alternative metrics a key factor for an emancipatory economy?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, okay, in terms of the question of GDP, it's not radical to say this, right? That GDP is a poor measure of social progress, right? Again, I described what it actually measures. And so there are many alternatives that have been proposed. One would be to take GDP and then you subtract ecological and social costs from that, and so we have a better picture of social progress in a single indicator, and indicators like this have been developed. The other approach is that let's just focus on the things we actually want to achieve and measure those, right? Do we want better education? Do we want better soil health? Do we want to reduce carbon emissions? Do we want to improve life expectancy, reduce mortality rates from cardiovascular disease? Let us measure these things directly, and then implement policies that we know can achieve those things. This way, we think more specifically about what kind of society we actually want to have and how to get there, which is superior to our existing arrangement, where we vacate our political imagination to the question of growth, right? Instead of engaging seriously, intellectually, politically with the question of how to improve society, we just accept that any increase in production of anything is somehow equal to a better world. It's actually completely insane. So we've vacated our our political imagination, which needs to be reclaimed. And I think that democratically setting targets for what we actually want to achieve is a good way forward. It brings clarity and focus to policymaking. So that's one thing. Now, crucially, it's not an accident that in capitalist societies we use GDP, right? It's not just that, like, some people say, oh, it's just a bad measure. We can just fix the measure and everything will be better. No. We measure the economy with GDP because that is what is beneficial to capital. That's what it's a metric that measures what is important to capital, namely the market price of production, right? So that's the reason we have it. In a capitalist economy, even if we were to switch to a different metric, capital would still be measuring production by GDP because this is what matters to them. So ultimately, this does not fix the problem. You have to go deeper and, again, reorganize control over productive capacity so that we can organize it more around the things that we actually need rather than things that are unnecessary and destructive. It's ultimately a question of economic democracy. That is ultimately the solution to both our social and ecological crises, asserting more democratic control over the direction that our labor and our resources, our planet's resources, are put to. What do we want to be producing? For whose benefit? So we have to go to that deeper level beyond just the metric that we're selecting.
Okay, I also asked this question because here, for example, the social and solidarity economy movement is working a lot in designing alternative metrics for going deeper in what is the relation in the different spheres of production, distribution, and consumption that are embedded in the local scale or in the regional scale. So metrics, this type of metrics maybe can facilitate the work to planify economy, to put in visibility and in value this kind of circuits of dynamics. But at the same time, what I see is that maybe overemphasizing this factor is putting in as an attachment that the model have to change, not only how you see this type of production, that it's also being developed in the capitalism. So I don't know if maybe this agenda that metrics are very important, we have to visualize all these type of relations, have to be a key factor or not. It's a
again, I think it has to be a key factor. We have to do this work. I think it's important for us to develop our sensibilities about economic policy, but is not itself a sufficient solution. I think that's the key argument here. I think one of the things I also want to get across here, which is quite important, just to build on what I was saying earlier, is that we can have a better society with less production than we have today. Right? This idea that simply needing more aggregate production is necessary for well-being improvements is just wrong. Like, with a fraction of the production that we currently have, we can have better social outcomes. I think really this is the message that has to be shared. We can end our social crises, we can improve people's access to housing, improve our work, improve our health outcomes, improve our food systems, without increasing GDP. And I think this is really the key message that has to come across. The question is, how do you do that? And again, it's a focus on the specific forms of production that we need to achieve. To the extent that metrics can help us do that, that's crucial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me change only a bit, the perspective. I want to ask you something about the relation between the working class and the ecological crisis, and specifically about the global north working class. Let me put it in that way. Maybe it's a bit provocative, but let me put it in that way. Sometimes it seems to me that the ecological crisis has its fundamental explanation in the consumption habits related to wealth. So many point out that the richest 10% of the global population are responsible of more than the 50% of the global emission. But while this is true, people living in not only the middle class neighborhoods, but also in the poorest neighborhoods of a global city of the global north like Barcelona are also part of this exclusive club. Yeah? What I mean is that the working class in the global north also belongs to that top 10% richest in the world. So if we are analyzing or explaining the ecological crisis in terms of habits, consumption habits, we have this problem. So what I think is that the lifestyle of the working class in the global north isn't driven by personal choices, but by structural factors. In the sense that no one drives 80 kilometers every day for going to a shit job because they like it. Yeah. Or nobody is integrated in that world economy that is based in cheap labor, cheap food, and expensive housing because they like it. So there is no freedom of choice for people who have no the way to live that by working more than 8 hours a week, hours a day, but also in the global north. Here we have this part of people that is suffering this type of eco-social crisis. So maybe the uncomfortable truth of the ecological crisis is not that there are people barely surviving while also polluting, but that there is a social majority, also in the global north, that has no control over the ecological conditions of their own existence. Yeah. So it's difficult, and here's the provocative part of the question. It's difficult to tell people that less is more when they can make ends meet, even with a job, even living in the global north, and are also blamed for living an unsustainable lifestyle. And I think that this situation is important in the sense that it could be also an explanation of why there are parts of the global north working class that are part of conservative movements that are against the Green Deal and that kind of policies. So the question is, how do you convey to that part of the population that has actually been degrowing for some time that degrowth is necessary, also to that global north working class?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the first thing to say is this, is that the ecological crisis is 100% caused by the ruling class, right? It's not like the working classes share some responsibility for this because they have some lifestyle emissions, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that's correct. And the reason is because this, like, for too long, we've been taught to think about the ecological crisis in terms of personal consumption, right? So, you have your own personal ecological footprint, et cetera, your personal carbon footprint. This has to be reduced. This is completely the wrong way to think about it. Because as you say, for most people, for the working classes, people don't have a choice over their structural emissions, right? If you're in a position where you have to drive to get to work, or if you live in rented housing and it's poorly insulated, like, you don't have control over this. If you rely on cheap food that is very carbon intensive, you don't have control over the food system, right? The working class does not have control over production. They don't have control over the energy system. They don't have control over national economic policy. The ruling class does. It is the ruling classes who are responsible for driving this crisis. So, of course, it does make sense to measure, like, consumption emissions of the elite. We know, for example, that millionaires alone are currently on track to burn 72% of the remaining carbon budget for 1.5 degrees, right? in this sense, this is entirely a crisis driven by the very rich, their personal consumption habits, which basically mean like their control over what we're producing, right? That's what consumption is. But for the working classes, the same metric does not apply. And so I think that the discourse has to be something different. It has to be about production. Again, who controls production? Who controls the energy system? Who controls decisions about national policy? The narrative that is correct, I think, is to say, look, we have to reject the bourgeois green narrative, which is to say, everybody has to tighten their belts and consume less. Again, for the working classes, what are they supposed to mean by this? What are they supposed to think of this? They already struggle to make ends meet. Now they have to consume less. No, of course they're going to reject this narrative, and you can see them rejecting it with backlash against bourgeois liberal green policy. So what is the correct alternative? Is to have a narrative that's like this. Look, what ultimately has to happen is the transformation of our system of production. Who can do that? The working classes. Put power in the hands of the working classes to control more democratically what we're producing, for what purpose, who benefits, et cetera, then they become the agents of ecological and social transformation, right? We are the ones who have the power. We are the workers, the ones who have the power over production, our productive capacities. We can make the transformations that are necessary. We already know what to do. We know what needs to be produced more of. We know what needs to be produced less of. The problem is we don't have control. And so I think that has to be the narrative, right? That empowers people, empowers the working classes, recognizes them as the agents of this transformation, not as victims of it. We need a political party, we need a political vehicle that can do this. I don't know if we see it right now, but until ecological politics is tightly connected to working class politics, to working class needs, to social policy, it's going to fail. And that is the reason that we're failing now. And so until we build those bridges, build those alliances, build those connections, we continue to lose. That's the transformation that has to occur. Now, and I'll say this, look, if degrowth as a word is an obstacle to achieving that, then don't use the word. I don't think that it's an important word. Like, it's important analytically for us as scientists, for us as intellectuals, for us as activists, but as like a public-facing campaign term, it doesn't need to be there. What matters is the policy, right? Policy that empowers people, policy that transforms our system of production, and so on. So I don't think anyone needs to be out there saying that the working class has to, accept degrowth. I mean, I think that degrowth is what we would naturally do if we had working class power over production. Immediately we would see, like, why are we laboring to produce things for elite consumption in the middle of an ecological emergency? Why are we expending our labor time to produce SUVs and mansions when we could be producing affordable housing and healthcare and renewable energy? I mean, clearly we would do the latter immediately. And so in some ways, like, degrowth is an outcome, rather, of a progressive eco-socialist transformation.
Maybe it's better in the first stage to talk about redistribution and not degrowth, maybe. I'm saying that, but for example, in your book Less is More, that I really invite all you to read it. It's an awesome book. I really love the way that you explain the story of capitalism and the way that the things that we have to do to let it dead. And there is I think that you analyze in a very good way what is the singularity of the capitalism. And you say the singularity of the capitalism, it's not money, it's not price systems, it's neither commodity, it's neither markets. The singularity of capitalism is neither growth, because it's a narrative. The singularity of capitalism is dispossession. The singularity of capitalism is appropriation of common basic social relations, of common language, of common cultures. So maybe the reverse of that, of appropriation, and dispossession is redistribution, not degrowth. It sounds...
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with that, but I would take it a bit further. Like normally when we hear redistribution, we think, okay, the rich are making all the money, and we're going to give some of that back to the poor, or to the working classes. I think this is actually the wrong way to think about it, right? It makes it seem as though the rich people are the ones who are actually producing wealth, which they're not. We are producing the wealth, right? The rich are simply appropriating it. And so I want to think about it differently. It's, again, a question of control over production. Mm-hmm. I would say this. The key thing that distinguishes capitalism from all other economic systems, all previous economic systems, is that it is undemocratic. It is a fundamentally undemocratic system. Now, this is strange for us to hear, because we live in a political democracy, here in Spain, for instance, where from time to time we get to elect our government officials, right? But when it comes to the economic sphere, the system of production, there's no democracy at all. Democracy is not allowed to enter, not even a pretense of democracy is allowed to enter the sphere of production, the economy. And so we have a situation where the most important thing about our society, we have no democratic control over. Think about that. The part of our society that determines our well-being, that determines our access to basic needs, that determines how we use our resources, that determines how we use our labor, our own labor, we have no democratic say over, in most cases. We spend the majority of our working lives in what are effectively authoritarian institutions called corporations, right? Where we don't have a say over what we're producing, we don't have a say over how our labor gets used, over how the yields of our production are distributed or invested, right? We're just captive to whatever capital wants us to be producing. And it's amazing to me that we continue to walk around saying we live in a democracy when we just clearly don't, right? Again, the most important part of our society is not democratic. So the antidote to capitalism, I would say, is in fact economic democracy. Extend the principle of democracy into the economy. Now, what does that mean in concrete terms? I would say a couple of things. First of all, it means universal public services, where we agree that we will prioritize the production of the things that we know we all need in order to live decent lives, right? Healthcare, housing, education, clean energy, clean water, recreational facilities, childcare, nutritious food. The basics of human survival and decent living have to be decommodified to ensure that everybody has access to those things. We are the workers, we do the production, we should get to decide the fact that we are producing these core goods and services for our society. That's the first thing. Now, of course, outside of this decommodified core economy, we can also have markets, right? But they should be post-capitalist markets, non-capitalist markets. What does that mean? It means that in our workplaces, we have democracy, right? Whether that's community co-ops or worker co-ops or worker ownership or worker management, worker decision-making, where we get to decide as the workers what we're going to be producing, how we're going to use our labor and resources, and who's going to benefit from these things, right? We know that under these conditions, people know exactly what to do. They prioritize the production of things that are necessary for well-being and ecology, and they deprioritize things that they know to be destructive and unnecessary, right? We already know the solution. It's simply transformation over control of production that is the key step we have to take. And really, I have to emphasize, it's wild to me that this is completely absent from our existing discourse on green economy or green transformation. Until we make this a central part of our discourse and planning on this, then we're missing the point. And we're also continuing to alienate working class communities. We have to change the story. That's my pitch.
Can we go deeper in this myth of green growth or a green economy? Because I think that a part of this social segments that control production have this program that they call green growth. So this has become very popular in some political discussions, with the idea that the new technologies and new technological innovations can decouple economy growth from fossil fuels. And for instance, many point in energy transitions in countries like Germany, or the push for electric mobility, as examples of decoupling. And I remember a book of the American, I think he is, American sociologist Jeremy Rifkin, that I think it was called the Global Green New Deal or something like that, where Jeremy Rifkin stated that the entire economy of the European Union has been decoupling and reducing emissions since the 1990s. So you argued that the promise of green growth or this type of green capitalism is largely misleading. So two questions here. Could you explain your thoughts about that more deeper? And especially if do economies that are truly decoupled from fossil fuel exist? And especially in the global north, there is this type of economy is running now in the present.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about green growth, right? So the promise of green growth is basically that we keep everything the same, and we continue to grow GDP exponentially forever, so that we'll all become, whatever, multimillionaires, while at the same time also achieving our ecological goals. Stopping climate change, staying under 1.5 degrees, reducing biodiversity loss, et cetera, et cetera. Right, so the idea is that GDP is rising, whereas ecological impact and resource use and emissions are all falling. This is called absolute decoupling. Now, when it comes to emissions, which is, let's focus on that. This is the important thing. This is happening. There's no question about it, right? In maybe 10, 15 of the rich countries, over the past decade or so, we have seen increasing GDP and falling emissions, even in consumption-based terms. So even if you correct for trade, okay? But this is not green growth. I mean, in the newspapers, you'll see this often being hailed as, hooray, we've achieved green growth, all of our problems are solved, blah, blah. It's a lie, right? When it comes to emissions reductions, it's not just any amount of emissions reduction that we have to achieve. We have to achieve very rapid emissions reductions, fast enough to get us to 0 by 2050, so that we can achieve the Paris Climate Agreement objectives, right? Right now, not a single wealthy economy is on track to achieve this, not even close. The countries that have achieved absolute decoupling are, with current rates, going to reach 0 emissions in 200 years on average, right? I mean, think about this. This is the pace that we're going. This is what people celebrate as green growth. It's a complete lie. It's not happening, and much faster mitigation is needed. Now, how do you achieve faster mitigation? Scientists are very clear what has to be achieved. You have to reduce total energy use, okay? The majority of our, and this is not about like, we have to turn off our lights at home more often, take shorter showers. I mean, of course, these things help a little bit, but the major users of energy are what? Industry. The big industries are the major users of energy. And of course, elite consumption, right? So scientists are very clear. Less necessary forms of industrial production have to be reduced in order to reduce total energy use and enable us to achieve much faster decarbonization. I mean, this is such an important point. The more energy we use, the more difficult it is for us to achieve rapid decarbonization. The less energy we use, the faster we can do it, right? And so this forces us into a position where we should think about what forms of energy use in our economy are unnecessary, what forms are important, and distribute energy accordingly. And this is effectively what degrowth tries to achieve. The reduction of unnecessary forms of production in order to reduce excess energy demand, in order to enable much faster rates of decarbonization. Mm-hmm. So that's the key, I think.
Mm-hmm. And which type of alliances that we need for doing that? So, because I'm not going to insist more in the global north working class, okay? But I think that here is a possible bargaining power for doing that, if we can organize these social segments, but also it's necessary to have global alliances. So we have to organize in the scale that capital is organizing. So which can be the first step for doing that? A global union, a confederation between unions, trying to articulate the climate movement with labor movements in North and also in the South. How can we even imagine to do this type of alliances? What's the first step? for the organization?
Yeah, look, I think that's, of course, it's important to think globally. Like, if we can achieve international alliances towards this kind of transformation, then this is important. I think one good example of this is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a very important initiative that I think now 13 countries have signed up to. And what they're doing is it's supposed to be an agreement that where states agree to reduce fossil fuel use. I mean, this sounds so obviously simple, but it's remarkable to consider the fact that in all of our climate discourse, actually agreements to reduce fossil fuel use don't exist. Think about that. Like, the Paris Agreement does not bind nations to reducing fossil fuel use. It's crazy. And so there's this additional campaign initiative to get states to agree to voluntarily reduce fossil fuel use in a way that is fair and just. So that's an example, I think, of international collaboration. But there's no question that the core movements have to come from the national level first, I think. And I think that we have to ask ourselves here in Spain, what is the political vehicle that can enable us to achieve this? In my view, look, I'm a socialist, but at the same time, my view is the current Socialist Party is not taking the correct steps, right? In fact, like, if you ask me, and again, I mean, actually, I'm quite fond of some of the key figures in the Socialist Party, but I still have to say it. Like, I think they've actually failed to introduce basic socialist policies, right? Like, the first thing that a socialist government should do is deal with the crisis of unemployment and housing, right? This is not difficult to deal with. Housing can be dealt with through, decommodifying housing, rent controls, increasing production of housing where necessary, and so on. Unemployment can be, unemployment, a major problem in Spain, can be dealt with simply through a public job guarantee, something I want to talk about later. The public job guarantee idea is absolutely essential to the kind of social and ecological transformation that we're calling for. A socialist party can introduce these things. The existing Socialist Party has failed to do so. And I think that's one of the reasons why they've struggled to gain very strong majorities, actually, because people can see this, like, this government is not fundamentally meeting these basic needs. So we need political parties that can achieve that campaign on those objectives, right? That can promise to fundamentally deal with the problem of economic insecurity in our economy, and do that in a way that at the same time they also achieve ecological goals. I think that, I mean, these are popular ideas. In Europe, they tend to poll with 70-80% majorities. I think that this can be the basis of a strong political movement that can gain power and introduce these changes. But we don't see that on the horizon right now. So that's the kind of party that has to be built, I think. And here I think it's essential to develop these alliances between working class movements, labor unions, and environmentalists. And I'm not seeing those alliances right now. They have to be developed, I think, yeah.
And summing to these alliances, I want to ask you about also some aspects of the institutional design that is necessary for this just ecological transition. So, for example, in the governance of this neoliberal stage, the public-private partnerships have been a fundamental role. So if we are trying to develop large-scale infrastructures, or if we really need these large-scale infrastructures, we maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll need in this first stage of the transition some type of public-private partnerships. So in the sense that, let's put it in that way, the executive capacity of these two actors maybe is necessary in this first stage. But at the same time, what can we ensure that this type of governance models prioritize sustainability and social well-being over private profits? Because all that we have seen all these decades is that this type of collaborations maybe are necessary for some scale, for having executive capacity for some scale, but also are a very bad alliance between state and capital. So do we really need public-private partnerships, or we have to do some, or to design some institutional forms or modes of governance alternative to this?
Yeah, okay, let's think about this. I want to dig a bit deeper here, actually. Look, again, the main problem we face here is who controls investment in a capitalist economy, right? Who controls finance and investment, which determines what we produce. Right now, it's overwhelmingly capital. And so we basically are in a situation where we're just condemned to produce whatever capital thinks is most profitable, right? Look, the energy system is actually an amazing example of this. Fossil fuels and renewables. We have the technology for renewables. They're actually very cheap to produce, you know? In fact, renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels in many cases. So why aren't we producing sufficient renewable energy? The answer is because renewable energy is not as profitable as fossil fuels. And so when capital has the choice of what to produce, they're going to invest in fossil fuel production over renewable energy production because they're driven by profit, right? And so this is the perverse situation we're in, where in the middle of an ecological emergency, which all of us are aware of and all of us want to solve, we're still producing more fossil fuels when it would actually be cheaper for us to produce more renewables, right? Why? Because it's not cost that determines what gets produced. It's not social benefit, it's not ecological benefit, it is profit. So here it becomes clear. We need different mechanisms for investment and finance. What does that look like? I think the key here is a robust public finance mechanism. Public finance enables us to produce things that are less profitable or even not profitable at all. Things that we know we need to produce, but capital is not producing. Public finance can drive that production. And this is not like a radical idea, really. Like all of the key major projects that we've achieved as a civilization, like our public healthcare system, our train infrastructure, right? Our education system. You think that we waited around for capital to produce these things? No, right? We use public finance to produce these things. And that's exactly what we need when it comes to other dimensions of social and ecological transformation. And here's the crucial thing here. People will say, oh, how are you going to fund that? I mean, don't you need private production of things in order to produce revenues, corporate revenues, that then you can tax and then do public spending to do these things? This is the wrong way to think about it. I mean, I want people to understand this fact. Corporations do not produce money, right? Right? Like the money that you all have in your pockets was not produced by corporations. It was produced by the state. The state has the power to produce money. Right now, under capitalism, the state licenses that power to commercial banks, who create money when they make loans. And they make loans, they make investments of credit on the basis of profitability. So they make loans not to things like renewable energy and affordable housing, because these are not very profitable. They make loans to things like SUVs and fast fashion, because these things are very profitable, right? We can reclaim that power of control over currency, money, like see money as a public good, right? And so that we have public finance institutions that can issue public finance to do the projects that we know are necessary, mobilizing our labor and our resources and our productive capacities to produce the things that we know are necessary. Under a situation like this, we can very rapidly solve the housing crisis. We can very rapidly solve the clean energy crisis. We can very rapidly improve our food systems, right? Because we're not waiting around for capital to do these things. We're just doing them directly. And so I think that public finance is really essential here. Now, to the extent that you may need expertise from the private sector, you can imagine a public-private partnership being quite useful. But it could also be a public community partnership or public cooperative partnership. You can imagine it in lots of different ways. But the role of the democratic public in guiding decisions about what we are going to produce is essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a question about this public common or public cooperative partnerships, but before I want to ask you another one about this public funding for developing these, for example, housing. here in Barcelona, it's a big problem. Not only in Barcelona, in all global cities, but here in Barcelona, access to housing is a big problem. And some experts say that building more public, affordable housing is a solution, but construction also increases the carbon emissions. So how do we balance this, the need for more affordable and public housing with the environmental impact of the construction? So how can balance these two issues?
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about housing. Although first, if it's okay, I just want to briefly add one important point, because in response to what I was just saying about public finance, immediately some of you are probably thinking, well, that sounds like it's going to cause inflation, right? And it's true. Like, you have to watch out for inflation. Inflation happens when we're demanding too much of our productive capacity than the national economy actually has. So if we're doing a lot more production of, say, housing and renewable energy and public transit, we're demanding labor, we're demanding resources, we're demanding energy, and competing with the private sector over those things. What's that going to cause? Inflation. Prices are going to go up, right? How do you prevent that? The key thing is you have to reduce private production elsewhere. And this is what degrowth does. Degrowth is anti-inflationary. And so if we're going to use public finance to increase production of affordable housing and public transit, then we have to reduce production elsewhere in the economy, and that should be a reduction of mansions and SUVs and fast fashion, et cetera, right? What that basically does is it liberates productive capacity in our economy. It liberates labor, it liberates resources and energy and factories to be reorganized around our democratically ratified public objectives, right? So you achieve your objectives, your increased public production, without any inflation at all. You control inflation this way, right? This is crucial. When it comes to the housing question, how do you deal with this? I propose to you that it's very simple. It's not a complicated question. If we face a literal deficit of housing, there is not enough of it, we have to build more, right? If there's not enough housing stock in Spain to make sure that every single person has a good home, then we have to build more. And that should be a priority. Instead of producing other things like casinos or whatever, casinos and mansions, let us produce housing for the people. That is the priority, right? So we use public finance to do that. If we're in a situation where there's actually enough housing, it's just a question of distribution and access. The prices are too high, the rents are too high, or some people have too many houses, then you have to deal with this in a different way. What I propose is you put a limit on the number of houses that any individual can own, right? The number of houses or rental units that any individual can own. Let's say that I own 15 houses, 15 flats in Barcelona. I wish. Mm-hmm. Let's say I own 15 flats in Barcelona. Some people in Barcelona do, right? Then they rent them out to tourists and blah, blah. You introduce a law saying that for every additional house besides your residence, you owe a certain tax. A tax that's high enough for your third or fourth, et cetera, that you're incentivized to sell. Suddenly, there's a rush of sale in the market. House prices go down, right? It makes houses more affordable to ordinary people like us, and also gives the public sector, the city, a chance to buy housing units, which then they can make available at affordable rates, right? So this is good housing that is integrated into the city, which can be then used to increase the public housing stock, and housing can become more affordable. So, again, the question to address these basic problems is not, we have to grow the whole economy, right? We have to deal with the problem by thinking about the specific sectors that are required to change, and also dealing with using policy to improve people's access to necessary goods.
Now, here you are touching a central issue, I think, that it's the capitalistic property regime. So when you touch this, reducing the number of houses that people could have, maybe in Barcelona, maybe there are not a lot of landlords, but there is a popular capitalism that survives under the promise that you can afford all of these financial assets. And so if you're touching this capitalistic property regime, so how can we do it in a way that can go step by step by not only touching this property, this housing and so on, but also infrastructures that are part of this management of the city, of this access to basic commodities, and trying to, I don't know if nationalize, but to reappropriate this big infrastructures that are also under this capitalist property regime. I don't know, how do you look at this?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So first of all, let me address this dream of the capitalist dream that you call it, right? Like, look, I think, does anybody actually buy this dream? Like, does anybody actually buy that any of us could just be, millionaires? I mean, like, for the vast majority of people, it's very clear this is a lie, right? So I don't really know, like, how much power this dream really has. Like, I think that, like, we should have a dream, which is that every family, every household should own their own house, and it should be affordable to them, right? This is a much more modest dream, which under capitalism we have failed to achieve. We have failed to achieve this basic objective. It's actually shocking, right? So we talk about, like, everyone could be a millionaire. I mean, people. In our existing system, not even everybody has a house. People can't even afford houses, right? So, like, my call here is for let's have realistic dreams and then actually achieve them. And I think that the idea that everyone should be able to own, that should be able to affordably own a house, is a basic piece of a decent civilization. I think the same thing extends also to other key infrastructures. Again, I would say, in addition to healthcare and education, transit, right? Like, everybody should have access to high-quality integrated public transit as a basic feature of public services, in the same way we have access to healthcare and education. I would say the same is true of food as well, right? Why don't we have, in the same way that we have a public healthcare system, I mean, food is essential to health, right? Why don't we have a public food system where every neighborhood in Barcelona, every neighborhood in Spain has a center, a neighborhood center, that ensures access to affordable, organic, regenerative produce, right? And perhaps even a kitchen that produces healthy, affordable, organic, regenerative meals at affordable prices, right? How would that change our society, right? Think about the labor saving this would entail. Like, instead of everybody having to reproduce all the time, cooking in their own home, you have the option of having convivial meals with people in your community in these spaces, right? It can be a chance for us to engage socially, and also transforms our food system, right? Because, I mean, all of a sudden, the supermarkets will have a lot less power, the restaurants will have a lot less power over our food system, right? This gives us a chance to incentivize regenerative farming that can replenish the soils and ecosystems of Spain, while we also provide good food to the population. Of course, you can still have, in a system like this, you can still have like market access for food as well. Why not? Keep the same private system as well. But there should be a public option at the same time. In the same way that we have a public option for healthcare, you also have private alternatives. Why not a public option for food? Abolish food insecurity, right? And use that as an opportunity at the same time to transform our food systems. These things are achievable for us. It's very cheap and affordable to do. The only reason we don't do it is because it's not profitable to capital, right? That's an equation we have to change. And so I think this is the way we should think about a universal public services arrangement.
So some more ideas on that way. I would like to ask you for a creative exercise in prospecting future. So could you describe what a typical day in a post-capitalist society might look like? How will an ordinary day in an eco-socialist Barcelona appears?
Okay, yeah, this is interesting. I like thinking about this. Now, in order for me to describe this properly, there's one more piece I want to share with you. So, like, I've talked so far about the importance of universal public services, right? I mean, this is important for the obvious social reasons. it secures the social foundation, removes our economic insecurity. But it's also crucial, of course, because it removes growth imperatives, right? It means that we can access the necessary goods and services that we need without very high levels of private income, okay? So does this make sense? I hope this is clear. Like, this is essential to ensuring social well-being and economic stability in the absence of growth. So it doesn't matter what's happening, like what's fluctuating in terms of aggregate output in the economy, as long as we're focusing on producing the core things that we actually need. And universal public services can be a key way to achieve this. So in a post-capitalist economy, that is one key thing that you have, right? You're never worried about, will you have access to nutritious food? Can you afford housing? Can you afford good healthcare and public transit? Right? These things we produce for each other, we guarantee access. That's one thing. The second key piece here, which I haven't had a chance to talk about, is the public job guarantee, right? Now let me describe what this means. The public job guarantee is a program that we would introduce that ensures that anyone who wants to can shift out of their existing work if they consider it to be destructive or hierarchical or not meaningful or bullshit jobs. And they can shift into socially and ecologically necessary forms of production that we know need to occur, which are not currently happening, right? Building renewable energy capacity, regenerating ecosystems, doing reforestation, building public services, expanding public transit, insulating homes, doing essential care work in our communities, building recreational facilities, whatever it might be, right? Forms of labor that we know to be necessary to our society and to our ecology. The job guarantee ensures a mechanism for training people to reorient into this form of production, guaranteeing living wages, including market competitive wages for necessary skills, right? Abolishing unemployment permanently. So there would be no involuntary unemployment. If you want a job, you're guaranteed one. You train, you do to do this kind of meaningful production, right? This is a way of ensuring universal access to good wages. It dramatically improves the bargaining power of labor, because this means that if you work in a shitty job where your boss abuses you, you can leave, right? You have the power to leave. And then your private employer is under pressure if they want to keep you. They're under pressure to match the conditions of the job guarantee, which should be living wages, economic democracy, say a 32-hour work week, whatever it may be, right? So you can improve conditions across the whole economy by using this mechanism. So does this make sense, right? The job guarantee allows us to reorganize production away from unnecessary production towards necessary production. It abolishes involuntary unemployment. It abolishes economic insecurity. It allows us to achieve our social and ecological objectives very quickly, right? So in a post-capitalist economy, these two would be core features. And I think this would change our society, right? Like, gone would be the anxiety that all of us face on a daily basis about, can we make ends meet? Can we survive? Right? Gone would be the sense of scarcity that we have. We have to compete with our neighbors. We have to worry about immigrants taking jobs, or whatever it might be, right? All of this sense of artificial scarcity is abolished. We can focus on what is necessary for a healthy and thriving society. We have the power to do this. It's a matter of taking steps in that direction.
Thank you so much. We're going to let the audience make some questions. Ens queden 10 minuts, crec. És el moment de fer les preguntes que us vinguin de gust al Jason. Després de tot el que ha dit, jo crec que hi ha com diverses coses que poden ser interessants preguntar-li. Si per aquí hi ha una paraula, per aquí, micròfon. 2, 3 i 4. Vale.
És obert?
Jason, do you want to sum some questions and then you answer?
That's fine, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have many, but I'm going to just ask one only. I wonder, like in 70s when the left was at its peak point in many geographies, I mean, there were sort of trials to passage to socialism, like in Bologna or Chile or not, even in Sweden in some forms. But there was the capital strike at that point, and that was one of the most important, problems that the working class had. And nowadays, we don't control the money, as you said before. It's not a public good. I mean, it's not even a fiat money. It's a financial money, and it's produced out of nothing. And it's like, the big funds, vulture funds like Blackstone or BlackRock can buy 10,000 flats or a big portion of Amazon's within few hours. So don't you imagine, even here we had a socialist party, a real one. It will not face a capital strike much more stronger than in the 70s.
Potser és millor anar sumant les 4 preguntes. M'ha dit el Jason Hickel que potser ho prefereix així, us sembla? Hi havia una per aquí i una altra per allà. Són 4 en total. We can make 4.
Sí.
Okay. I així aprofitem més els minuts, si us sembla.
Hello. I have 2 questions, actually, if that's okay. The first one is something you said at the beginning, which was about the word, degrowth. And you said that for analysts and scientists, it's important to call it like that. But for people, maybe it would be better to give it another name. And I thought about maybe it would be more catchy to call it like social growth or something like that. And I wanted to ask you, why is it like that? Why do analysts need to call it degrowth, and why can it not have another name? And the second question is that about something you said towards the end. You were describing what an eco-socialist city like Barcelona would look like and all the things it would need. And my question is, if there is any place, not even city or country, nowadays that is similar or follows what you were saying, what you were describing. Thank you.
Gràcies.
Well, first of all, thank you both for the conversation. So my question is, how do you think the approach regarding these issues, and by these issues I mean the climate crisis and the need to rethink capitalism, how do you think the approach should be different between the countries in the global north and the countries in the global south? Because I think we are forgetting about those countries that have different needs than we do. So I understand, like the countries in the north, we can say we have so much now, and we need to use that money for other things, right? But there are countries in the global south which are struggling to actually reduce their dependence from the countries in the north. So how do you think the approach should be different in this regard? And do you think that the countries in the south have an opportunity to do things differently?
I la última i al fons.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. My question was, it's more related with investment. Basically, I believe, same as you, Jason, that the working class, it's one of the most important agents of change in your thesis. But I believe that probably when the real change is achieved is when financial resources and private investors will take part of this change as well. So in that context, let's say, for regular people that are doing investments nowadays, and you will see on Instagram this influencer saying, go and invest on S&P 500, for example. But then in S&P 500, we have beauties such as Amazon and McDonald's, which obviously are not in the line of what we want to invest on. So my question is, what will be the instruments, financial instruments that regular people or people that has money and are willing to invest in this kind of thesis should approach to? Thanks.
Jason, so you have 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
I'm so sorry for that.
Okay.
10 minutes. Okay. 10 minutes. No. You have time for
Okay,
answer.
wonderful. Okay, are we taking more questions, or is that it?
Yeah, maybe we can. No. We have 4 questions and you can answer. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. These are really interesting questions. I'm delighted to be in conversation with you all about this. So, yeah, let me discuss the question of the capital strike, which is actually quite important. Look, I mean, to the extent that the capital strike is simply a question of an investment strike, like literal money, literal finance, this is not difficult to solve. I mean, you solve it with public finance. And so if capital decides we're just not going to make the investments, then you establish a public finance institution and you just do it anyways, you know? Like you don't need to wait for capital to decide this. To the extent that the investment strike is or the capital strike is capitalists closing down factories, let's say, this is a bit more complicated. Here I think governments have some powers that they can exercise. You know, you close down a factory that is actually essential for us to be producing for the national good, then we're going to have to bring this factory into public control. For example, like during World War II, this was widely done. We need to maximize our use of the factories to achieve certain objectives, to produce tanks and bombers, whatever it might be. And if you refuse and want to produce SUVs and fast fashion instead, then sorry, we're going to have to achieve some kind of agreement here. So this can also be done. But and of course, workers have a role in this through strikes and occupations, I think. But again, the core problem can be dealt with through public finance. To the question of degrowth as a term, like why do analysts need it? The people that designed the term degrowth made it intentionally provocative, right? Like if it was just a well-being economy or social growth or something like that, you would not hear about it. It would just be lost in the morass of bullshit that's out there, right? It could mean anything. Degrowth is useful because it's provocative. It forces you into a conversation. Like your first instinct is, that sounds terrible. There's no way you can have an economy that survives such a thing. And then you read more about it and you discover what's actually going on, and it forces an intellectual process. And creates converts to new ways of thinking, right? It's about intellectual development. So it's useful in that respect. It's also very specific. The reality is there are some industries that have to be scaled down. No one is facing up to that reality. Degrowth forces a conversation about this. So it's just the reality. If we have to reduce fast fashion and production of private jets, what do you call that? There's a word for that, and it's called degrowth. It's quite a useful word, actually. So it brings clarity and focus to our conversations. But again, I don't think it has to be a public-facing term. Let me briefly say, there's a new study that our colleagues at LSE have just been working on, where they put forward the proposal, as I've laid it out to you, to demographically representative audiences in the UK and the US, thousands and thousands of people. Without using the term degrowth, to see the extent of public support. How much do you think the public support was for this program? Almost 80% in both countries, right? Now, so it's very, very popular, these ideas. It aligns with what we know needs to be achieved. This is a popular political program that can win elections and can achieve transformation. When you use the term degrowth attached to that explanation, then support goes down a little bit, but not very much, a few percentage points. If you use the term degrowth without the explanation, support is very low, maybe 20, 25%, okay? So what does this mean to us? It means that if you're going to use the term degrowth, you should accompany it with public education, right? If you don't have time for that kind of explanation, then don't use the term. Use other terms. And we found that other terms are more popular, like eco-socialism or well-being economy. These are more popular terms. And so if you don't have time for the education, you can use terms like this and they're more successful. I think this is an important finding that should inform the way that we proceed. To the question of the Global South, let me briefly address this. It's so important. Degrowth is aimed only at the rich countries. I don't know why I didn't say this in the beginning, This is absolutely essential. It's only aimed at countries that have excess levels of resource use and excess levels of energy use. In the Global South, they actually have too little resource use and too little energy use. They have to increase their use of energy and resources to build the infrastructure necessary for meeting basic needs, okay? This is called growth. They need to increase their industrial production. They need to increase their infrastructural development. The Global South needs growth. One of the key reasons that degrowth is important in the imperial core, in the core economies, the rich countries, is to liberate ecological space for development in the Global South, right? So it's about transforming the world economy in this way. It's not just about ecology, it's also about global justice. So that's a really crucial point. To the question of individual investments, I think this is also important. Like, to the extent that any of us have surplus beyond our consumption needs, then yes, this can be invested. And I think that investing in building societies, right? These local community banks, or investing in green ecological banks like Triodos Bank, for example, can be a good way of investing directly in the kinds of projects that we want to see developed, right? But I'll say in general, like, the power that we have as individuals is much less than the power we need. The power we need is collective power, and that comes in the form of building the political movements that can achieve political power, establish public finance institutions, establish universal public services, establish a job guarantee, and achieve rapid transformation in our economy that we need.
Okay, it's time. Thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you,
Jason.
and thank you all for joining us.
Incredible, as always. So, només... Gràcies.
Thank you.
Només recordar que a 7:15, dintre de 10 o 15 minuts, hi haurà aquí la sessió Poder i Espai, Violència, Queer i Discapacitat, i espero que hagueu disfrutat d'aquesta sessió amb el Jason Hickel. Us convido de nou, tot i que no sóc el seu director editorial, a que llegiu el llibre Less is More, Menos es Más, i que tingueu una bona tarda.
Muchas gracias.